Hello, everyone. Today's lecture builds on Dr. Ajibade's idea of female representation in Afrobeat, which he described and explored from the lens of Afrobeat by Fela Nikulako Kuti and the role of his coins, not only in the Kalakuta Republic, but also outside of it, and how their identity, their gender performances are ways of constructing power, presence, representation, and the voice of women within Afrobeat and, in fact, within the publics, especially across southwestern Nigeria and in other western nations of Africa. Adolfo's work, which is specifically in the chapter 5 of his work, where he explores Wixmen and Afrobeat, builds on Ajibade's ideas from Fela Anikulapo's Queens to help us see how Africa, as a continent and the culture that underlies the practices around the genre Afrobeat and the presence of women within this genre, view women. And so, women within this space are constructed as a breed that it's supposed to, that is confined to certain space other than the musical space. Therefore, when women are found in clubs or are seen expressing their artistic prowess in whatever form, they are automatically labeled prostitutes, people who are not doing what is appropriate for their gender. And in Adolphus chapter 5, he helps us understand that women also moved beyond this conceptualization, just like the fella queens gained agency for themselves to recreate what beauty is and how this impact on their performances and in fact how they want to be perceived. The same way we've had women who are not just part of the Afrobeat movement, but are also moving beyond Afrobeat into the Afrobeat with the S and continue to reconstruct agency and the voice of women. Foremost amongst them is Miriam Makeba of South Africa, whose work is really ingrained in so much political activism. Our work involved jazz and calypso, and in fact, that breed of it is very comparable to what Fela Anikulapo Kuti's Afrobeat began with. And in Miriam Makeba's work, she pushed against the apartheid South Africa, the imposition of Africans in schools, and she used music as a tool of engaging dialogue, in fact, of questioning and challenging the existing perspective, existing ways in which the Black identity, the Black people have been subjugated within South Africa. During the movement, when there was a lot of movement against the use of Africans in school because Black community in South Africa believed that Africans is an imposed language of colonialism, imposed language of white supremacy. And because of the work of artists like Miriam Makeba, who is also a woman, I mean, the song was viral and it led to a lot of punishment whereby she lost her citizenship as a South African. She had to move exile. And in the process of even using her music for political activism, of course, lives were lost. Were killed in Soweto as a result of some of this movement and the role that our music played in it. But she is remembered as an important legend when we are thinking about women activism, political participation, and in fact, emancipation of the Black community in South Africa. Miriam Makeba was the first African woman to win the Grammy Award, and in fact, she was the first to headline the Royal Albert Show. And so, While we see the role of not scholars, artists like Makeba and our political activism, our political activism is not the one that is confined within the space created in the Kalakuta republics, and that also called for the gaze of the publics on what Fela coins represent within that space and even beyond the space. And there are questions around Fela's agenda and what he wanted to achieve with that. Yes, his political activism is also part of the motives of why he went into Afrobeats from the lens of politics and the underpinnings of it, of realizing the self and challenging all the rhetorics and practices of governance that are against Africans, Nigerians, and the masses generally. But in Makeba's perspective, it is just not what is done within the gaze of a man or within the confine of what a man created. Instead, it is the voice of Miriam. It is our own initiative. It is our artistic work that continues to call for emancipation of the Black community. And beyond Miriam Makeba, there are other people across Western Africa who were also women that participated in several forms of Afrobeats, African music, and popular African music in general. Part of them are the Lijadu sisters, who were twins, and in fact, um second cousin to Fela Anikulapo Kuti. They did a lot of work, and their work is also a fusion of jazz, Afrobeat, and reggae. They also relocated to the US at some point and continued their work. Christian Esen, Igokwe, and other artists from Ghana, like the Tago sisters, were all women who participated in this movement. However, in Ghana specifically, women are not looked at favorably in their participation and work in the Afrobeat music genre space and their role in that. However, when it comes to, religious music, then it's all welcome and received positively because women are using their voice in ways that speaks back to the acceptance of religious practices. And this is in itself also questionable in terms of how women are boxed into what is conceived as the ideal, not what is the reality and the expression of knowing and knowledge, intellectual capability of women. While religion is a choice, intellectual capability is not. It shouldn't be anything that is labeled or boxed by gender. And so this brings back some, questioning and challenging of how Africa itself, the cultural practices of the people, continues to push and shape women into different kinds of categorization that limits and reduces and clips the wing of women, I would say. And so, but beyond the issue of religious activism, there are other women, especially in Ghana, who pushed beyond just the activism that we see in in religion. Like, for example, Ebony Reigns in Ghana was one artist who continues to express her sexuality, women's sexuality, and how they want to express that and use that in the public. Yes, there was a lot of backlash, even though these artists did not live for a very long time, but the memory of what she did are ways that poignantly challenged perspectives of who talks about sex, who expresses sexuality, in what space and how. And these are important way of thinking about the role of women in Afrobeats. Other ones that are really pushing for the political representation of women include Thames, whom was labeled the princess of Afrobeats, Yemi Alade, and a host of other ones who did extremely important works. For example, Tiwa Savage was very instrumental in the End SARS movement, challenging the works of challenging police brutality in Nigeria and calling for the interventions of the publics in addressing issues like that. We also have other artists that joined, like Thames and other female artists. So beyond Adolfo's work, Simfiwe Renz also did an excellent work exploring the role of women in Afrobeat. For Renz, his interest is in women's empowerment and their agency in self determination. And when he did this, he tried to explore the agency of women from the lens of what he called um, feminist sensibility. This sensibility is a form of feminism that does not limit feminism to activism, but the choice and the flexibility of women in determining what works for them, what they want to do, and how they want to bring the self into existing narratives about different issues of the society. And so Renz particularly uses what he called the post-feminist sensibility as an ideology that is deeply entrenched in a neoliberal worldview that calls for the celebration of individuality and choice. And so he coined the concept which he called misogyrum, a cultural sensibility that mediates performances of femininities. He argues that many of the Afrobeats music that we see pushes women within that space where the women body, the women aesthetics, and their display of the self and expression of their sexuality is not necessarily power, but at the same time, it is a complex relationship that connects with the African culture of, seeing women as a form of aesthetics and as a form of assets that relies on the men gaze for women to gain that presence that they desire. And so, for him, the misogyny in Afrobeat space and genre itself is wrapped in romance. And that brings about the questioning. So, is that emancipation if there is misogyny in romance? And then what is then romance? Who defines romance? Is it from the lens of women themselves, or what the society has constructed what romance should look? And so for Renz, gender is more or less a ritualized performance and, in fact, a social construct, and it continues to be in constant flux and states of becoming. And so, in the process of this, there is the need to then question how do African womanhood and manhood, for instance, exclusively emerging from these normative ideals of heterosexuality brings women into some form of empowerment, or it continues to make women um, reliance on men in terms of what they are able to do for them, what makes women women within the African culture, and explicit heterosexual romantic orientation that is usually sustained via the nonverbal gestures and intimate physical touch that we see in many Afrobeat music. And in building on this perspective, it challenges performances of masculinities in Afrobeat as a way in which misogynistic advances of men's superiority are not just only veiled by and mediated through romanticism, but it's not even questioned or challenged. And therefore, he moved on to explore what he called sexative, the combination or the morphological combination of being sexual and at the same time assertive, to help us see the positionality of women and their perspective of their belonging with that within that space. And so Renz argues that the visibility of sexually assertive Black African women and their gendered performances and expression of their sexualities are important ways of seeing their assertion and their positionality within the Afrobeat. Therefore, it challenges the moralistic African public script about acceptable womanhood. Within this perspective, he did not just continue with this idea of post-feminism sensibility, but he also talked about the idea of African good time girl, a kind of idea that fixates women within these moral standards that are supposed to be expressed by women who are hyper visibilized, and to also express some sort of moral lessons within the Afrobeat space. And so for Renz, what Renz is saying that women take agency to assert themselves, to express their femininity, and to choose what this expression imply for themselves and for the cultures that they belong in. I have linked into the Canvas site questions and discussions that we are going to explore as we continue to engage with sexuality, women, feminism, and women representation in Afrobeats and Afrobeats with the S. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if there are ideas that you want to um, discuss with me. Happy learning.